Kia ora, koroa, dina kutu. Welcome everybody to this rather unusual first ever virtual Waitangi Day celebration. It is actually nice because if we were in person, we'd probably all be wearing these things. And it's much better, I think you'll all agree, to be able to see expressions, however good or bad the expressions are. And to have everybody's face very clear to us. It's very nice to welcome everybody again to this, especially to our special guests today. And I should say at the outset, feel free, if you have to leave and return for any reason, feel free to do that. We don't want to be too over formal. And I know some various needs sometimes arise and you have to leave us, so feel free to do that if you have to. I especially want to welcome His Excellency the New Zealand High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, Bede Corry. He's already been in contact with us a couple of times, and his assistant Lauren Cooper, the executive assistant in the Commission in London. So we particularly welcome you very, very warmly to your first formal event at the Ballance House with the Ulster New Zealand Trust. More about the High Commissioner shortly. I want to welcome particularly the Right Worshipful, the Mayor of Lisburn and Castlereagh, Nicholas Trimble. He has been a friend of us since taking office, and I know he supports us, and his council have done tremendous work with us and for us over many years, and we're very grateful for that, and for your giving us your time again today. And to David Burns, the Chief Executive of the Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council. Thank you, David, for being available to us. I know you're all absolutely stretched out of your minds. It must be a dreadful time to be working in that role. The Lisburn, as it was, the council in those days, they formed a special friendship treaty with Whangarei, and that was done with the facilitation of the trust, especially with David Twigg, who's one of our most important members and directors in previous years. And that friendship treaty still exists between Lisburn and Whanganui in New Zealand. So that's a very important link between here, one of the many between here and Northern Ireland. I want to welcome, even though it's his own home territory, Professor Sinclair Stockman, the Honorary New Zealand Consul in Northern Ireland, who is doing tremendous work here on their behalf and for us too. There are a number of other people that I'd like to welcome. Jonathan Saint, the president of the New Zealand Association in Dublin, was to be here. I'm not sure if he's joined us yet. Richard Klingon, who is the vice principal at Royal School Dungannon, which has this tremendous exchange link with Dilworth School in Auckland, whose prime minister, who produced a prime minister in Mike Moore, actually, who was around at the time of the opening of the house in a period when there was a bit of turbulence in New Zealand politics, but Mike Moore shared that time with Jim Bolger. Ian Enlander was one of our special guests today, is going to be speaking, and tell you more about Ian during the course of this morning's programme. We have a number of neighbouring partnerships that have sponsored and helped us in many ways in recent years, and they're also with us as our guests this morning. You're all extremely welcome, and I thank you for joining us wherever you are here. And this is being recorded, so it's going to go to New Zealand, I hope, more or less as soon as we can send it after this meeting is over. The meeting today is obviously one of our several events during the year to celebrate Waitangi Day. It's a treaty which, interestingly, when it was formed many years ago, it was on the basis of an agreement between the British and the Maori chiefs. The Maori chiefs and the English had different translations, around which there have been very many different debates and disputes over many years. The text of the treaty caused a lot of confusion. It led to major misunderstandings over centuries now. And it is a treaty, of course, and I think those of us here now with the Brexit treaty are beginning to understand why there are problems. Back in the days of the signing of the Waitangi Treaty, the British believed that they were getting full sovereignty back, or getting full sovereignty of the islands, and the Maori chieftains believed that they were getting a kind of cooperative venture, and treaties in Northern Ireland have now come to the fore with protocols and so forth. So we understand, High Commissioner, something of the problems, ongoing problems surrounding lands and territories and borders. We understand it particularly well, being a small island of a larger continent too. So we're going to start this morning with that welcome from myself by the proper formal haka, and this will be performed by the tutors from Dilworth School in Auckland to Northern Ireland's Royal School Dungannon, and they perform this every year in the flesh, and we filmed it last year, and we're now going to have that from the 3 Dilworth tutors from 2020. pleasure to welcome His Excellency, the High Commissioner from New Zealand to the UK. Bede Corry is somebody with a huge background in diplomacy. He was Deputy Chief Executive at the Ministry of Trade and Tourism. He was previously Deputy Secretary for Australia, New Zealand, Middle East, Africa and Europe. He has been Ambassador to Thailand and is also in missions from New Zealand to Washington and Canberra, as well as being at one stage Deputy Secretary of the Ministry of Defence. And now I know that his time, apart from all the other many things that he has to occupy himself with, he'll be looking very hard at trade relations between the UK and New Zealand in the wake of Brexit. We really hope that if not linen, which was of course one of the great original links between Northern Ireland and New Zealand, particularly from the mills around the province here, one indeed at Dungannon next door to the Royal School. The linen trade was something that was very, very powerful. But with wool, meat, sheep, farming and all those links from the past, we hope that there will be now an even greater interest in the wonderful white wines from New Zealand as well, and many other things. I'm sure that's part of what the High Commissioner will be looking at, making ways and means of opening up those channels and bringing back some of the lost trade routes that we had prior to being part of the common market as it was then. So with those words, can I welcome Bede Corry to the Ulster New Zealand Trust on this particular day. So you're very welcome. We wish you every blessing for your time here in the UK. And we would ask you now to bring your greetings from the High Commission and from your government.
Very good. Ena mana, ena reo, e ro rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I've just acknowledged the prestige of this event. I've acknowledged the Māori language in which I spoke. I've acknowledged the important personages who are present among us. And I have greeted you 3 times to say that you are welcome. As Paul said, my name is Bede Corry and I'm the new-ish High Commissioner for New Zealand to the United Kingdom. I've in fact been here since August. But of course, the conditions prevailing since that time mean that I've barely left the dining room from where I speak to you today. And in different times, of course, by now I would have visited Northern Ireland and of course been delighted in particular to visit Ballance House. I want to acknowledge the Right Worshipful, the Mayor of Lisburn and Castlereagh, Nicholas Trimble. Of course, the Council has such an important and enduring connection with the Whanganui City Council in New Zealand, home to one of our shared sons, John Ballance, and it's the place where he is, of course, buried. Also acknowledging David Byrne from the Council, Sinclair Stockman, of course, the New Zealand Honorary Consul in Northern Ireland. Paul, you yourself, thank you for everything that you do as Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Trust. And with the support that you've acknowledged from Brian McKnight. Let me acknowledge those Dilworth tutors who performed the haka that we saw earlier. And let me finally welcome members of the Trust, New Zealanders in Northern Ireland and friends of New Zealand. First, thank you so much for honouring Waitangi Day with this event. It is, as I will go on to explain, a day of great significance to New Zealand. And it matters a lot to us that you are marking it. And of course, it's entirely fitting that you do, given the very deep connections between Ulster and New Zealand. Migration from Ulster has played such an important role in the demography of modern New Zealand. And of course, you've also been of some assistance, as Paul has acknowledged, in ensuring that we have a ready supply of Prime Ministers, Premiers, and indeed prestigious rugby shields. And I know that through the vibrant community of New Zealanders in Northern Ireland, I certainly hope that we are returning the favour and adding vibrancy to your community, although, as far as I'm aware, we've provided no First Ministers yet. This is the 11th time that I have marked Waitangi Day in another country other than New Zealand. I've marked it in places as diverse as Wollongong in Australia, Washington, DC in the United States, Bangkok in Thailand, and now in the United Kingdom. And as any person who's commemorated their National Day in another country knows, it's a time of contradictory emotions. It is a day where, on the one hand, you feel very close to your homeland, and any Kiwis on the call will, I'm sure, have felt that when they saw the national anthem played in those beautiful New Zealand landscapes. So you feel that closeness, but you're also reminded just how far away you are from home. And I don't think that can be any truer than it is today, living as we do under the constraints imposed by coronavirus, where I think we no doubt feel very homesick for New Zealand, but feel very distant from it, given the very different conditions that exist in both places. And of course, given the great difficulty of necessity in travelling these days. So there is that sense of closeness, and also that sense of distance and sadness about that. Waitangi Day, though, is more than simply about how far or close we feel from New Zealand. It's a very important day to New Zealand. It is the day when we recall our founding document, the Treaty of Waitangi, signed at Waitangi in 1840 on the 6th of February. But it's more than simply remembering an anniversary of an important event. It's the day when we remember how much work needs to be done to realise the inherent promise of the treaty, and of the work that we all need to do to ensure that Māori people in New Zealand can enjoy well-being, prosperity and happiness in their country. The Treaty of Waitangi has been likened to a bridge, and what a fitting and appealing metaphor that can be, suggesting as it does the linking of two sides and the capacity for transit between them. But as Prime Minister Ardern has said, bridges imply two-way traffic. And in a speech in which she said that, she talked of a Maori perspective to the effect that there is that bridge, but that it is the sad case that Maori people have walked across it more often than Pākehā New Zealanders have walked across it. In other words, it is Maori who accommodate more often than not the Pākehā world, and not the other way around. We saw an example of that this week at a place called Ruapekapeka in the far north of New Zealand, where the Maori descendants of those who fought and died in a bloody battle there 175 years ago gathered in remembrance and reconciliation to mark a memorial to the 12 British soldiers who died there. And this week, the Prime Minister spoke of how foundational the events at Ruapekapeka are to New Zealand's identity, and that if we better understand our past, we can build a New Zealand that better understands itself. And she used a Maori proverb which said, "Titoro atu ki taumata o te moana, tākiri ko te ata." And that means look at what is beyond the horizon. So our own horizon here in the United Kingdom can seem, whether in London or in Ulster, can seem very hazy and ill-defined at the moment. But let's realise the promise of that proverb and look beyond it. Not just to the time when vaccines rescue us from the pandemic, although I'm sure we're all looking forward to that, but also to think about the country that has inspired us to gather today and the journey that it is navigating as it seeks to realise the promise of the treaty. A country that has probably never seemed so far away, while also being so close to our hearts. And let's think about the bridges that connect us to our homes, wherever they are, whether through kinship, friendship, nostalgia, or even just a Zoom. And let us think about the bridges we have with one another and the need to ensure that each of us works hard to cross to the other side. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, High Commissioner. That's an excellent and thoughtful beginning to our ceremony today. We do hope that we've seen actually those celebrations on a video provided for us. Some of us have watched it, and there'll be a link to it on our website. And indeed, that particular battle and the significance of it at Ruapeka will be very much marked and really very well done. So we will follow that through. I'm sure many of us will watch it again. So thank you so much for that introduction, and we do hope that we'll see you here in the flesh. Despite the many negotiations you're going to be involved with, you know that your predecessors and your successors will always have a warm welcome at the Ballance House. And in Northern Ireland, we're known for that hospitality and that warmth of welcome. So get away from the London smoke and take a quick flight to us when you can, when you're allowed to, without having to quarantine. And we will really look forward to welcome you, possibly this time next year, if not before. Thank you for what you're doing, and we hope you'll have health to enjoy your time in your current role. Thank you very much indeed. We now come to another item this morning, but before that, I think we have with us, and Sally can correct me, Mr. Councillor Aaron Callan, who is he with us this morning? I can't see a picture. Is Aaron with us?
I've a big list of people here, Paul.
If Aaron is with us, would you like to unmute? Because Aaron is the Secretary of the Massey Foundation in Limavady, and as High Commissioner may well know, that the grounds of the Northern Ireland Parliament are surrounded by lovely countryside, and one of the main approach roads is the Massey Avenue. So his contribution is well marked, as is that of James Dilworth, one of the great philanthropists coming from Northern Ireland via Australia to New Zealand and doing so much work in New Zealand in terms of education. And Dilworth School, which is very, very close to us, and headmasters have been very, very supportive of the exchange scheme. And you saw 3 of their boys, but the whole of New Zealand education was in those early 1900s, one of the biggest movements was that a desire to educate boys from impoverished backgrounds, straitened circumstances, and of families of repute. They were given free education, as they are 121 years later, still today, providing that for those who have less privileged backgrounds, and indeed bringing them over to the UK and to Northern Ireland to extend their education in large numbers. So it's a two-way scheme, which is, I think, not quite unprecedented, unequal, but it's certainly one of very few doing that, so that the young generations can have that link continued between this country and your country, High Commissioner. That's a most important link, and so many other strands in it. In the grounds of Dilworth School, there is an Irish High Cross, which was the stone for which was brought to New Zealand, 18 tons of it from the original quarry in Northern Ireland. And from those designs of a very, very old cross, it came back, the designs came back to this country, and now at the birthplace, or near the birthplace of James Dilworth, there is another high cross behind the very old and worn high cross stones, just outside Dungannon. So the links are amazing, and we continue them in rugby and cricket particularly. And we will have in our exhibition here, which we're about to launch, we will have many things that illustrate that long connection between our two countries. So when you visit as High Commissioner, we know that you'll be interested, and we look forward to seeing you there. Ladies and gentlemen, I now would like to introduce to you Mr. Ian Enlander, who is our special speaker today. Ian has been interested in birds, in particular the bird conservation, for a long time, for much of his life. He's retired now, having worked for the Northern Ireland Environment Agency as both their geologist and senior ornithologist. So he's working at his hobbies, and he spent some time a couple of years ago in New Zealand touring for 2 months and seeing the stunning scenery that those of us who have been privileged to have visited New Zealand have also been very privileged to see. And Ian's going to talk to us now on something of the bird life that he has witnessed, and he's bringing a presentation, I think, in PowerPoint, and I hope that it will work. So we welcome you, Ian, this morning. Thank you for giving us your time and your interest. We hand over the camera to you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very honoured to be invited to be part of the Waitangi celebration. It's not an area of New Zealand that I actually made it to 3 years ago when we were out there. But also I'm very grateful for the opportunity, because every time I look back through my photographic collection from that trip, it just reminds me of what a wonderful country New Zealand is. I'm going to start off the talk really just to give a sense of a New Zealand perhaps from the past. Obviously it's locations that are still there today, but there's still a lot of natural habitat, a lot of natural wildlife in New Zealand that gives a feel of what the country must have been like when the Maori first arrived, and even when and also when the first European settlers arrived. So it's just a quick run around some of the main habitats that I took in as part of the trip. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce any of the Maori words or descriptors for some of these sites, but I love the language they used. It obviously conveys a very deep emotional bond with the landscape that is a lesson for us all, I suppose, at a global level in times of great global change. Starting off up in Northland area on North Island, the Corry forests, and I've never seen trees like this. The Corry trees are reckoned, if in their original state, possibly may have been the second largest tree in the world, and wonderful habitat associated with them. Everywhere that you go within these woodland areas, tree ferns just proliferate. Birds are my passion, and bellbird is a species that's relatively common. It's doing quite well in New Zealand, but it struck, if you can read the annotation down at the bottom of the slide, it struck Joseph Banks when he was there as the botanist on Cook's first voyage to New Zealand. The song of the bellbird obviously made a great impression, so hopefully you can hear a little bit of bellbird song. I love just waking up every morning as we travelled around New Zealand in our little camper van, just being woken up to the sound of bellbird. Another woodland bird, but also relatively common within urban parks and gardens, is the tui. The other main woodland type in New Zealand is this southern beech woodland. Again, beautiful colours, beautiful associated wildlife. Lots of uplands in New Zealand. This is a couple of days that we spent down at Tongariro for me to do the famous alpine crossing. In the foreground, we can see some of the tussock grasslands that are characteristic of these upland areas. And just beautiful, something that we don't really experience much of nowadays in Ireland. There's lots of snow landscapes in mountains. This is Tongariro itself, so I was very close to the summit area and praying that there was not going to be any eruptions that day. And New Zealand is a volcanically active area, lots of geothermal areas as well as the actual volcanoes. This is at Waitangi, quite close to Rotorua, one of the big thermal lake complexes. And this is a beautiful pied stilt that actually nest close to the geothermal waters, the hot springs. So the water actually does the incubation of the eggs for them, so allowing them to take time off and stretch their necks. Obviously, the South Island has got the most majestic set of mountains in the Southern Alps, and this is a view to, again, apologies for pronunciation, Aoraki, Mount Cook. Why wouldn't we call it Cloud Piercer? Forget about Mount Cook. This is the view up to, well, the now retreating Tasman Glacier. This is a lake that didn't exist up until the 1970s, so a clear indication that the climate change is having an effect even in remote places like New Zealand. And a more accessible glacier, Franz Josef, called the Tears of Hini-Hukatere. Wonderful place. Again, fantastic scenery in the area. And lots of birds. This is a South Island tomtit. And the view up into the core of the Southern Alps is just breathtaking scenery. And again, I love the Maori word for the Southern Alps, the translation of it, and this steep peak of glistening white. So these are the sort of landscapes not unfamiliar to us in this part of the world. They show evidence of past glaciation. So much about wildlife in New Zealand is just plain weird. This is a bird called the rock wren, which lives up in these alpine zones and hasn't been found in winter anywhere else at lower altitudes. So people are beginning to come around to the recognition that this thing actually can live under the snow through the winter period, excavating tunnels that allows it to move around and find food for itself. But you don't get more weird than that. Water is a very important element of the New Zealand landscape. Fortunately, when we were there, it hardly rained at all, even down in fjord land. But all of those upland small streamlets, rivulets, feed down into wonderful rivers. Again, another river making its way through these southern beach woodland areas. This is at the end of the Tasman system, so it's a big delta complex on Lake Pukaki, and possibly it's hard to select one critically important place for wildlife in New Zealand, but this delta holds a number of species that are critically endangered. I was lucky enough to come across black stilt, possibly less than 150 individuals left in the wild. More of these rivers have a key indication that they're affected by these big spate flood events. These are called braided rivers, a type of river system that we don't get in Ireland. This one is over at Haast. And these are very important habitats for a number of endemic species. This is the black-fronted tern. Lupins shouldn't be part of this photograph. They're an alien invasive species from South Africa, but it's hard to not to admire them. And beautiful lake areas, again in the Southern Alps. This is in the Glenorchy area. And coastal areas. I love the coastlines around the Abel Tasman National Park. We did a lot of walking around there. Beautiful, beautiful areas. And down to Milford Sound, where the scouring on these cliffs is an indication of repeated landslips that occur. So all of these are pretty well as they would have appeared maybe 500-600 years ago before the Maori arrived, and certainly over the past have remained unaltered over the past 150 plus years since Europeans arrived. Right around the coast, wonderful seabirds. I'll say a bit more about those in a while. This is pied shag, beautiful coloration. And of course, it wasn't all about wildlife, so I'm taking in some of the Maori cultural sites as well. This is a meeting house at Waitangi, and the architectural form carries across to a number of other Maori constructions. So this is a beautiful little church at Onuku, at Akaroa, near Akaroa, not far from Christchurch on South Island. And then some of the beautiful items on display in the Rotorua village complexes. And we saw the haka earlier, and that's presumably the wall panels are a reflection of a lot of the facial imagery produced during the haka. So obviously the staring eyes and the protruding tongue. And the use of the shells, so paue shells, which are such an important part of Maori culture. I haven't been able to find out what the feathers from this cloak are, but Maoris made use of a lot of the natural resources that were at their disposal, including feathers from birds to make these wonderful cloaks. One thing that was very different in the pre-Maori and post-Maori period was some of the wildlife that disappeared, that went into extinction after the Maoris had arrived. And at the top we can see some of the moa birds. There was 9 different species of these, now totally extinct. And on the left of that upper photograph is Haast's eagle, that's reckoned to be probably the largest bird of prey that has ever existed. Unfortunately, all hunted to extinction, but also impacted by, on the bottom we can see some of the fellow travelers that arrived with the Maori, the Polynesian rat and the Polynesian dog, the Corry, which once let loose on an island where the native fauna weren't used to such things, succumbed quite quickly. And that was a precursor to what happened when Europeans arrived and brought more alien invasive species with them. So I chose a couple of groups of birds in particular that made a very strong emotional impact on me. So the very first time that I've seen parrots in the wild, and this is the wonderful Kia, which isn't camera shy. Those of you that have been particularly in around the road down to Milford Pass, I'm sure will have seen these things, hoping that they're not going to get onto your car and start ripping important bits of technology away from the car. These are the only alpines, the only species of parrot that exists in alpine habitats, and still numbers are declining for various reasons, but a lot of conservation actions are taking place to try and address that. But what a show they put on in terms of their plumage. Beautiful, beautiful animals. And Kia is the best known of the parrots that you can regularly see, but we can also see kaka, which is doing well in reserve areas. These were photographed down at Ulva Island, which is just off Stewart Island. I spent a wonderful couple of days traveling around. And wherever these reserves are established and these predatory species are removed, then a whole range of other species flourish. And this is South Island saddleback, beautifully marked bird. And then there's a range of parakeet species present that we came across as well. So this is the red-crowned parakeet. And I was lucky enough to get to see the yellow-crowned parakeet on one of the small reserve islands in off Picton area. How I wish we had birds this colourful in Northern Ireland. It would be wonderful. And a bird that I wasn't able to get to see, but it would be an oversight to not mention it, the wonderful kakapo. And as I say, that word weird, just applying to so much of New Zealand's wildlife, a large flightless parrot that nests in holes in the ground. Hopefully there'll be a full recovery of the kakapo population, and it'll be reintroduced to areas where people can go and visit them in the wild. Penguins, I'd seen plenty in the zoos, but getting to see them in nature and in the wild is critically important as well to me. This is probably the most abundant species of penguin in New Zealand, the little or blue penguin. And seeing a picture like this just reminds me of standing down at the seafront in Stewart Island with a wonderful glass of IPA. They make really good beer in New Zealand. Watching the blue penguins coming ashore to the breeding colony. This obviously isn't a penguin, but is very important to those that go wildlife spotting down in the South Island, the West Coast and the South Coast. This is the black fly. So this is a bizarre location, Bushman's Centre, which perhaps some of you have passed through. It made a bit of a reputation for itself as serving both bushmeat but also roadkill. So when I went in and asked, what have you got that's suitable for vegetarians, I got a bit of a sneer. But black fly are a serious nuisance, perhaps more than a nuisance. So whenever I see the black fly, I immediately think of these penguins, the Fiordland crested penguin down on South Island, and particularly the first encounter that I had with them with my wife down near Hast, where I was just so enamored with these penguins coming ashore. There's a small breeding colony there. All of these photographs, I must say, taken with long lenses, so I wasn't disturbing the birds. So I was indifferent to the black flies devouring me, but I looked around to see my wife totally covered, wrapped in her coat, just rolling around on the beach, just trying to get the flies off her. There's a lot of other penguin species in New Zealand. This is the Snares Island penguin, which I saw but wasn't able to photograph, just on a boat trip out from Stewart Island. But it reminded me that we think of New Zealand as North Island, South Island, and if we really sort of diligently pick our brains, we remember Stewart Island. But there's the whole series of what are referred to as the sub-Antarctic islands, which are so important at a global scale for wildlife, in particular whole range of seabird species. And finally, the yellow-eyed penguin, which again critically endangered, but memories of a lovely evening just sitting on the beach quietly with my wife, just waiting for these birds to appear and waddle their way up in a very peculiar looking way up the beach towards their nest areas. The coast has got a range of other species. So this is Hooker's sea lion. It's the most endangered sea lion species in the world. And when I saw these ones, and thinking back to the haka that we just saw earlier, this is obviously what the New Zealand, the All Black rugby team sort of model themselves on in terms of build and physique. These are scary animals, very scary animals. I couldn't do a run through New Zealand's wildlife without thinking about or reminding you about kiwi. This is possibly the best picture that I got of kiwi. Obviously a nocturnal species, so hard to photograph. 5 different species occur in New Zealand. And soon after we arrived on North Island, we did a dedicated walk, a nighttime walk with an expert. And I thought I'd just play you some of the sounds of, so this is a North Island brown kiwi. So that's the male calling as a attraction, trying to attract in a mate. But everything about looking for kiwis or trying to find kiwi is about using your ears. They're the only group of birds in the world that have their nostrils at the end of their bill. So they're continually snuffling and sneezing as they probe their bill in all of the leaf litter and the forest undergrowth, trying to find food. This is the closest I got to the famous kiwis on Stewart Island. I staked out a beach for a couple of nights, but didn't see anything, and then got up the following morning to find fresh footprints to show that they obviously waited until I had gone. And just finishing off with the spectacular seabirds that New Zealand host, probably more endemic breeding seabirds than any country of a similar size anywhere in the world. So really important for these. This is the Antipodean albatross. It used to be known as wandering albatross, but the splitters have been at it. So these are trips, boat trips going out from Kaikoura. Another albatross, salvans. Again, the first time I've seen albatross species ever, and really did bring a lump to my throat and a tear to my eye. These big bruisers, again, another species that reminded me of the New Zealand rugby team. These are northern great giant petrels. They're very, very fierce, but even they can put on a sort of a delicate soft landing in the sea. And as is often the case with those big boat trips out of Kaikoura, you're accompanied by dusky dolphins along the way. And what else could add to such a perfect day? Birds and dolphins like that. So thank you very much indeed for your time. This is a parting shot, not quite the classic shot of the long white cloud. Is the translation for the Maori for New Zealand, but the cloud formations up in the cloud piercer, Mount Cook, was just mesmerizing. Thank you very much.
That's absolutely wonderful, Ian. Thank you so much. You're obviously not an eminent geologist and ornithologist, but your photography skills are quite clearly way ahead of most normal mortals. I hope that didn't make, High Commissioner, I hope it didn't make you and your fellow Kiwis feel too much of a homesickness. But it was amazing, and we've learned so much this morning. Just time for a couple of quick questions. If anybody would like to ask, unmute and ask Ian while he's here. That was a wonderful wonderful presentation, Ian. I'm sure everybody's been struck by it again, the sheer beauty of the country and its wildlife. Anybody want to ask a question before Ian takes his leave? I didn't realize there were 5 different species of kiwi, of animal kiwis.
Just wait till the geneticists get at them, Paul. I'm sure there'll be more before long.
Conservation-wise, Your Excellency, any comments about government plans to aid the? You can't do much about the receding glaciers, but about the conservation of some of those species that we saw.
A question for me.
That if you can, yes.
Well, I think the biggest contribution the government is making in this area is the plan to make New Zealand predator-free, because of the effect on our bird life of rats and stoats and weasels and ferrets and feral cats. So they, in particular, the kiwi, of course, is a ground-based bird, and some of the other birds are fairly slow-moving, and also their nests are vulnerable. So I think that is, probably the biggest single thing the government is doing in that area at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you.
If I could just add, Paul, that New Zealand is to be congratulated. The 2050 plan is the most challenging, but also foresighted plan to deal with alien invasive issues anywhere in the world. And New Zealand are absolutely leading the way on this at a global scale.
Yes. As in many other areas, biosecurity, they've long been champions of preventing us bringing in germs and disease to in our sporting gear, in our footwear, but they've now championed the world in protecting its citizens from virus spread. Any other questions? Well,
yeah, if possible, yeah.
Go ahead, please.
John Belshaw, White Mountain and District Community Association. Hello, Ian. Our paths cross again. It's great to hear Ian's voice. Ian's actually the sole reason why Belshaw's Corry Nature Reserve is of national significance to the Lisburn Borough and an area of special scientific interest. From your geology background, Ian, is New Zealand, the two islands in New Zealand, were they ever joined as such, or were they disconnected and come together to be close away back in Pangea times, if you know what I mean?
No, jeepers. I mean, New Zealand, what we see as New Zealand is part of a former, much larger continent called Zealandia, which split away from Gondwana land. Wonderful words. Apologies to people that couldn't care less about geology. So it split away around about 80 million years ago. So what we see of New Zealand as New Zealand now is really a very, very small remnant of what was a much larger continental area. Specifically with the north-south island position, I honestly can't say. But New Zealand is changing, obviously not at the time scales that humans are aware of, but from a geological perspective, changing very, very dramatically as one of these what are called tectonic plate boundaries runs pretty well through the middle of the island. So bits of the island of North Island in particular are extending and will continue to grow. Other bits, particularly in South Island, where the Pacific plate is disappearing underneath the Australian plate. Mountain building is to the fore, but slowly and gradually, unfortunately, over the next tens of millions of years, New Zealand, those parts of New Zealand will disappear down what's referred to as the subduction zone. So watch this space. Things will be changing.
Good question. Thank you so much for that. Any other questions? Well, I think we should draw to a close. I thought the Mayor might like to bring a greeting to the High Commissioner with the link with Wanganui, and being a Wellingtonian, I think it's very appropriate. Mayor Trimble, would you like to say a few words directly to the High Commissioner from your base in Lisburn?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Paul, for bringing me in. I just want to thank everybody actually for putting this together. COVID is not without its challenges of trying to do things in a virtual format, and we did have a little bit of technical difficulties there, but I think it has been very fruitful and certainly very enlightening. To His Excellency, Mr. Bede Corry, I just want to thank you personally for the comments that you've made today. I actually find them incredibly inspiring, and I think there's a huge lesson that's I think all of us across the whole world, but particularly here in Northern Ireland, we can be inspired by what you said. I must confess I didn't fully appreciate the complexities of the Waitangi Treaty and the ambiguities, or what's the way to put it, the misconceptions maybe that still persist from it, and I'm just sort of saddened that that's possibly a pattern that we're familiar with here to an extent, and has been repeated across the world, really, where you've two different peoples, and how do you reconcile them? But I'm hugely encouraged that New Zealand certainly seems to be taking a very proactive stance in trying to reconcile and live together. And the comments that you quoted from your Prime Minister about crossing the bridge, yes, bridges are two-way traffic, and we all of us need to go over bridges together. I also just want to say, Paul, if you'll let me, to Ian and his presentation there, I thought I was watching Wildlife on One here or something. It was really very professional. The photography and the depth of detail was just stunning, and it just makes me want to travel to New Zealand, really, a land I've never had the opportunity to go to. But who knows, maybe in days when this pandemic is not restricting us, I may look forward to going, but we'll have to save up for the fare on the airplane. But I just want to thank you for today, and I also want to look forward to your exhibition that's hopefully in the summer. I think you're saying is going to be hopefully, well, touch wood, open and available for people to come to, and if restrictions do allow, I would certainly love to come and see it in the flesh. But thank you very much for today and for inviting me to be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Mayor, and I thank you for mentioning too. We're just launching an appeal. It's difficult days for all charities, not least of all ourselves. Grants are in short supply for obvious reasons throughout the land, and so we're launching this week an appeal to help us with this exhibition. Brian Mackey, who's one of our members currently. Brian, would you say hello so people can see your face? Is Brian there? Brian Mackey, is Brian Mackey there? He may have had to leave. Brian has been working very hard on this exhibition. We're trying to bring in digital aids that museums nowadays and such tourist centres as our own use to make sure that the several thousand visitors we not get in a normal year can continue to do that, and to this area which the Mayor is in charge of, Lisburn and Castlereagh, not far from the airport, not far from the cruise ships in the docks at Belfast. And we look forward to the time that normality will return, but we have been supported by many people, our guests and visitors this morning, our sponsors, our friends, our neighbourhood partnerships have done wonderful things, and we hope too that other bodies, including New Zealand government, will yet again come in to our aid as they did in 1991, 30 years ago. But we're all a little bit down because of the current situation, and I think what we do here in this reminds us that beyond the politics and the pandemics and some of the ugly side of life, what links us over the past, our history, our culture, the people who've been involved, the humour that links us, not least of all that New Zealand North Island was once called New Ulster, New Munster, the South Island, New Leinster, Stewart Island. These things were built around people, people who travelled from this part of the world to form a new land, a new country, to lead it in various ways, culturally, agriculturally, in sport and so forth. The first captain of the All Blacks was Dave Gallagher from Ulster. and we look forward on the eve of the Six Nations tournament to seeing some more examples. We have many people coming from that part of the world, Pacifica, to play for our teams, even for Ireland. It's amazing, and coached Ireland in the past, and Ulster. So it's a wonderful thing. We see the human side of it, and that's what we're about. All of us here in Ulster New Zealand Trust. It's a human thing that transcends boundaries and borders, and we've got to keep our sense of humor. My wife has a world map, one that she uses for world missions and so forth, and she gave me a dart not so long ago and said, throw this, and wherever it lands, you'll take me to after the pandemic travel restrictions end. So it turns out that we're spending 2 weeks behind the fridge. I interrupted my daughter, who's 3 young children. I was telling her off for talking to herself, and she said, "No, Dad, I'm not talking to myself. This is a parent-teacher consultation." So let's all keep smiling. Thank you to, again, the High Commissioner for gracing us with his presence this morning. We really appreciate that hugely, and his staff there in London. Do take the first opportunity to come across. Thank you to all our visitors and friends. To Ian for a wonderful, wonderful presentation, Ian. Thank you for the time and effort you put into it. We really enjoyed that. Thank you to Sally and Rory, who struggled valiantly with the electronics. We hope this time next year we'll see you all in the flesh. So all that remains for me to say to everybody, thank you again. Nua ora mai and kakite ano. Thank you all. Farewell.